There comes a moment in every life when the mind grows tired of being the battlefield, tired of wrestling with itself, tired of trying to control the storm by shouting at the clouds. You may not recognize that moment when it arrives because it doesn't come with fireworks or revelations. It comes quietly. It feels like a soft exhale, a silent surrender, a gentle thought that whispers, "What if I don't fight anymore?" This is the doorway to clearing the mind, not by forcing it, not by disciplining it, not by wrestling it into silence, but by allowing thoughts to rise and fall without making any of them yours. Because your mind was never meant to carry ownership of every passing idea. Most of the thoughts that move through awareness are not chosen. They appear like birds landing on a branch, and they depart just as easily, unless you grab them, cage them, and start calling them your identity. The problem is not thinking. The problem is believing every thought is you. Imagine sitting in a quiet room, a single window open, breeze flowing through, curtains rising and falling like the breath of the house itself. Thoughts move the same way. They drift in, they drift out. They belong to the wind, to memory, to conditioning, to habit, but not to you. You are the room, not the wind. When you begin to see this clearly, something inside you relaxes in a way it never has before. There is a profound relief in knowing you don't have to manage every story the mind invents. You don't have to categorize, evaluate, judge, defend, or reshape every narrative the ego throws at you. You don't have to respond to every echo from the past or every projection of the future. You can simply watch. And in the watching, the mind begins to clear, effortlessly. Most people spend their entire lives believing they are the author of every thought that appears in their awareness. If an angry thought appears, they conclude, "I am angry." If a fearful thought arises, they whisper internally, "I am afraid." If a memory resurfaces, they assume it is important simply because it has shown up. But what if this is the central misunderstanding? The mind contains layers: personal memory, inherited conditioning, cultural programming, collective fear, unconscious associations, biological impulses. Thoughts rise from these layers, like bubbles rising from the bottom of a lake. They are not personal, they are automatic, they are mechanical, they are old echoes replaying themselves. But the ego does something strange. It claims ownership. It says, "That's my thought, therefore it defines me." It says, "This story came into my mind, therefore it must be true." It says, "If I am thinking it, it must be important." But thought does not become true by appearing, and thought does not become you by arising, and thought does not become meaningful because you notice it. In truth, thoughts are just weather systems moving through awareness. Storms, breezes, gusts of memory, waves of imagery. None of them prove anything. None of them control you unless you kneel before them. None of them last unless you feed them. And this is the beginning of clearing the mind. Not stopping thought, but invalidating its authority. You watch a fearful image arise, and you say quietly, "This is not me." You watch an old memory surface and say, "This does not define me." You notice an anxious scenario unfolding in imagination and whisper, "This is not happening." The moment you stop defending these thoughts, they lose their power. The moment you stop assigning them meaning, they dissolve. The moment you stop believing they belong to you, they pass through like clouds. This is the secret that every mystic eventually discovers. You are not the thinker of your thoughts. You are the presence that notices them. If there is one thing the ego cannot stand, it is neutrality. A neutral thought is harmless. A neutral memory is harmless. A neutral sensation is harmless. So the ego assigns meaning to everything. A small tension in the chest becomes "something is wrong." A forgotten appointment becomes "I'm failing again." A strange look from someone becomes "they don't like me." A moment of silence becomes "I should be doing more." The ego never sees anything as it is. It only sees what it fears or what it wants. This is why the mind feels so heavy when it's identified with thought. Every sensation, every memory, every image, is turned into a judgment, a story, a problem, a prediction. But here is the truth. The Course repeats again and again. Nothing you see means anything until you give it meaning. And the meaning you give it is always based on the past. When you look at the present moment through the lens of old fear, you are not seeing the present moment at all. You are seeing a projection. You are seeing a ghost of yesterday superimposed on today. That is why thought feels burdensome. Not because thought is wrong, but because you're interpreting everything through a lens that has nothing to do with what is actually happening. Clearing your mind begins with the willingness to let the present moment be innocent. A sound is just a sound. A sensation is just a sensation. A memory is just a memory. A thought is just a passing impulse in the nervous system. When you stop injecting meaning into everything, your mind becomes spacious, wide, open, and uncluttered. Not through force, not through discipline, but through the simple act of not interfering. Imagine watching a river. Water flows, leaves pass, debris floats by. The river does not argue with what appears. It does not claim ownership over what drifts through it. It does not try to keep or reject anything. The clear mind is the same. It is a river of awareness. Thoughts float through, but the river is not disturbed. For most of your life, you treated your mind like a basement full of boxes you're supposed to organize. The ego convinced you that every thought is a piece of evidence. Every memory is a puzzle to solve. Every feeling is a threat unless analyzed. So you kept opening boxes, digging through old stories, sorting through emotional debris, trying to make sense of it all. But the truth is this: your mind was never meant to store the past. The mind becomes heavy only when it clings to memory, clings to interpretation, clings to fear, clings to what happened and what might happen. This clinging is what creates chaos. Thoughts themselves are not heavy. Identification is heavy. Meaning is heavy. Ownership is heavy. Letting go is weightlessness. Imagine cleaning that old basement, but instead of organizing the boxes, you take them outside and realize they were empty all along. The weight you felt was imagined. The burden was psychological, not real. This is what happens when the mind starts to clear. You realize most of your mental suffering came from believing the stories that never deserved your loyalty. You realize the mind wasn't hurting you. Your attachment to thought was. You realize the noise in your head was only loud because you kept turning toward it. When you stop feeding the past with attention, it starves. And in that starvation, something miraculous begins to happen. The present moment steps forward. Not as an idea, not as a meditation practice, but as your natural state. The present moment does not need clearing. It is already clear. The only fog is the fog you carry from the past. Clear your grip on the past, the present clears itself. This is what the Holy Spirit does. Not by erasing memory, but by dissolving its value. You look at the old story, feel its emotional pull, and then something inside you quietly asks, "Does this matter now?" And the story collapses. Not through effort, but through irrelevance. This is clearing the mind. Letting the present moment become more important than the past you keep resurrecting. If the past is a weight you carry, then the future is the shadow it casts. Every fear you project forward is memory wearing a mask. Every anxious scenario is yesterday replaying itself in tomorrow's costume. This is why the ego loves the future so much. It can recycle the same fear forever, calling it preparation. But preparation without presence is just worry. And worry is imagination used against yourself. Look closely at your most terrifying future scenarios. Each one is built from something you've already experienced, or something someone else feared aloud. Not one of them comes from the present moment. Not one of them arises from truth. They come from old lessons, old pain, old conclusions. The future is simply the past projected forward and believed again. When you try to clear your mind by controlling the future, you are actually rearranging the past. You're trying to solve fear with more fear. You're trying to create safety with imagination, when imagination is the very thing making you afraid. The mind becomes clear only when the future loses its magnetism. You don't need to know what happens next. You don't need to predict. You don't need to be ready just in case. You don't need the illusion of certainty. Certainty does not come from knowing the future. Certainty comes from knowing yourself. When your identity rests in the present moment, the future loses its power to frighten you. Try this. Imagine stepping into the next moment without bringing the last moment with you. Imagine entering tomorrow with no emotional debts from yesterday. Imagine waking up and remembering nothing except that you are here, now. The mind becomes clear not by pushing away the future, but by no longer believing it can hurt you. Fear of the future collapses when you realize the future does not exist. Only your thoughts about it do, and thoughts can be undone. There is a moment in spiritual practice when everything becomes much simpler, but only after you've exhausted every complicated method. You try analyzing your thoughts. You try replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. You try forcing silence, commanding calm, disciplining your attention, and for a while it works, until it doesn't. Then one day, you discover something radically different. You can simply watch the mind without joining it. This is the beginning of true freedom. When you watch a thought instead of believing it, the thought weakens. When you observe a fear instead of fighting it, the fear dissolves. When you notice a memory instead of identifying with it, the memory loses its emotional charge. When you see an anxious image arise in your mind and choose not to follow it, it collapses like a dream when you wake up. The mind clears by being witnessed, not corrected, not managed, not rearranged, witnessed. Imagine sitting by the side of a highway. Cars rush by, some loud, some quiet, some fast, some slow. This is your mind. The worst suffering happens the moment you run into the road and try to stop every car, direct traffic, or hold on to a vehicle that's trying to move on. Watching your thoughts is the moment you finally step out of the traffic. Thoughts keep moving, but you do not. The noise continues, but it no longer belongs to you. The speed accelerates and slows, but you remain still. In this observation, something remarkable reveals itself. The observer is not the mind. The one watching is calm, spacious, timeless, untouched. The thoughts rise and fall, but the watcher remains. You begin to sense a quiet presence beneath your thinking, an awareness that does not judge, does not hurry, does not fear, does not condemn. The ego tries to claim this stillness by saying, "Look, I am doing it. I am being spiritual now." But even that claim is just another thought passing by. The observer of the ego is not the ego. The more you watch, the more distance appears. The more distance appears, the more your identity begins to shift. You stop feeling like the thinker of the thoughts and start feeling like the space in which they appear. This is what A Course in Miracles calls stepping back. Not a retreat, not avoidance, but a restoration of your true position. You were never meant to be entangled in every fragment of mental noise. You were meant to see the mind, not drown in it. As this witnessing strengthens, a subtle, beautiful intelligence awakens. You begin to intuitively know which thoughts come from fear and which come from truth. You begin to recognize when the ego is reactivating its favorite stories. You begin to feel the difference between an authentic impulse and a conditioned reaction. This is clarity. Clarity does not come from suppressing thought. It comes from standing outside the theater of the mind and realizing you are not the actor. You are the light revealing the stage. You become less reactive, less defensive, less obsessed with interpretation, less afraid of your own imagination. When a disturbing thought appears, you look at it with softness. When an old guilt resurfaces, you see it as an echo, not a fact. When a fear shows up, you notice its texture, its voice, its tone, and you choose not to enter its story. Watching the mind is the most compassionate way to relate to it. It is like watching a child throw a tantrum without believing the accusations. It is like watching the weather shift without believing the storm is personal. It is like watching a movie without forgetting you are sitting in a theater. You begin to understand something breathtaking. Your peace does not depend on what thoughts arise. Your peace depends on whether you believe them. This realization is the beginning of mastery, not control over thought, but freedom from its tyranny. And in that freedom, the mind becomes clearer, not because the thoughts disappear, but because your belief in them does. Something extraordinary happens when you stop reacting to your thoughts. Your thoughts stop attacking you. Most people don't realize this, because for their entire lives, every thought that appears has been met with either fear, resistance, guilt, or engagement. The ego throws a dark idea into your awareness, and immediately the body tightens, the breath shortens, the heart contracts. The ego whispers a memory, and instantly you relive it, argue with it, defend yourself against it. The ego projects a future disaster, and you start preparing emotionally for something that hasn't happened. Every reaction feeds the thought. Every reaction validates the illusion. Every reaction strengthens the ego. The ego's survival depends entirely on your attention. Withdraw your attention, and it dies of starvation. This is why the Holy Spirit never reacts. Not to your fears, not to your fantasies, not to your guilt. The Holy Spirit looks at the ego's entire thought system with absolute non-interest. Not rejection, not resistance, non-interest. Because what is not real does not need to be fought. It only needs to be overlooked. When you begin practicing this, something shifts inside you that feels almost supernatural. A fear thought arises, and instead of tightening, you soften. A guilty memory surfaces, and instead of reliving it, you breathe. An anxious image appears, and instead of predicting catastrophe, you simply witness it. The thought becomes like a puddle drying in the sun. Its power evaporates. This is the spiritual art of non-reaction, one of the deepest teachings in A Course in Miracles. Non-reaction is not apathy, it is wisdom. It is the recognition that the ego's offerings are counterfeit and do not deserve your energy. Think of a child shouting nonsense. If you argue with the child, the shouting grows louder. If you correct the child, the shouting becomes more dramatic. If you fight the child, the shouting becomes aggressive. But if you simply acknowledge the noise without believing it, the child eventually stops. The ego is the same. Its entire strategy is to provoke you into engagement. Because if you engage, you believe, and if you believe, you suffer. But if you simply watch it, without apology, without panic, without investment, the noise loses its hook. This is why awareness is the highest form of intelligence. Awareness sees without absorbing. Awareness listens without obeying. Awareness notices without identifying. And here is the secret. Once you stop reacting, the ego loses its authority. Once the ego loses its authority, the mind begins to calm. Once the mind calms, the Holy Spirit's voice becomes audible. The Holy Spirit does not compete. It does not shout over the ego. It does not fight for your attention. It waits for silence. Silence is not the absence of thought. Silence is the absence of belief in thought. When you experience this for the first time, even for a second, the entire world feels softer, lighter, more spacious. You feel as if a tight band around your forehead has suddenly loosened. Your breathing deepens, your chest opens, your shoulders drop. You feel located again, not lost inside mental noise. You feel like yourself. And in that quietness, you sense a guidance that feels ancient yet intimate, familiar yet new. It does not speak in words, it speaks in direction, in clarity, in gentleness. It says things like, "Don't go there. Wait. This is safe. This is not for you. Let this go. Return to now." These are not thoughts. They are movements of consciousness, tonal shifts in awareness, soft insights that require no thinking. Once you taste this, you understand something profound. Your true mind does not need thinking. It needs space. The clearer the space, the clearer the guidance. There is a moment the Course calls the holy instant. It is not mystical in the dramatic sense. It does not require candles, meditation, cushions, or perfect silence. It happens in the most ordinary moments: washing dishes, pausing before replying, standing in a doorway, sitting at a red light. The holy instant is simply the awareness of now without the past or the future intruding. You have tasted it before, even if you didn't name it. A moment when everything feels strangely simple. A moment when your shoulders soften without reason. A moment when life loses its sharp edges and becomes gentle. A moment when you feel completely here. In that moment, the mind is naturally clear, not because you forced clarity, but because you stopped dragging time into the present. The past is the mind's clutter. The future is the mind's anxiety. Remove them, and what remains is clarity itself. The holy instant is the collapse of time. No memory to defend, no future to fear, no identity to maintain, no story to fix, no role to play, just presence. When you experience even 1 second of this, you understand directly that the mind does not need healing. It needs relief from its own narratives. You see that the mind is peaceful when it is empty of me. You realize that consciousness is naturally clear when it is not hijacked by imagination. In the holy instant, you feel the soft hum of existence. You feel grounded in a way thought can never imitate. You feel held by something quiet and benevolent. You feel like the world is not against you, because the world no longer needs to be interpreted through fear. The ego hates the holy instant because it cannot survive it. Fear cannot live in the present. Guilt cannot appear without the past. Anxiety cannot arise without the future. Shame cannot breathe without memory. Control cannot exist without imagined consequences. The ego depends entirely on time. So when you step into the holy instant, even accidentally, the ego panics. It whispers, "You're wasting time." It whispers, "Think about what you need to do." It whispers, "Don't just sit here. Something will go wrong." The ego drags the past and future into your awareness because that is where it lives. It is never here. It cannot be here. Here is the end of its world. This is why your clearest moments feel timeless, because they are. In the holy instant, the mind feels light, as if someone removed 1,000 pounds of thought from your chest. Decisions become effortless. Emotions become transparent. The world looks softer. Problems seem less threatening. You feel an almost childlike trust in life. The Course says this trust is your natural state, and you begin to realize you were never trying to clear your mind. You were trying to return to the part of you that was always clear. The holy instant reveals that the mind is not healed by improvement. It is healed by presence, and presence is what remains when nothing else occupies your attention. Imagine living with more holy instants, not perfection, not permanent enlightenment, just more brief returns to now. 1 second of presence clears hours of mental noise. 1 moment of clarity dissolves years of confusion. 1 instant of truth untangles a lifetime of fear. This is the power of the holy instant. It heals without effort, because it reveals what was always true. And what was always true is this: the mind does not need to be fixed. It needs to be emptied of what was never real. There is a point on the path, subtle, quiet, and easily overlooked, where clearing the mind becomes less about letting go and more about simply losing interest in what is not true. The things that once consumed you begin to feel distant, almost hollow. The dramas that once pulled you in with magnetic force now look like old movies you no longer relate to. The narratives that used to haunt you lose their emotional flavor. You find yourself forgetting to suffer in the ways you used to. This is not apathy. This is awakening. When the ego's thoughts stop impressing you, the ego loses its authority. And when the ego loses authority, the mind becomes clear. The Course teaches that the ego speaks first and loudest. But loudness is not strength. Loudness is desperation. The ego raises its voice because it knows you are slipping away from its world. It knows you are beginning to see through its lies. It knows you are noticing that peace is possible without its permission. That is the moment the ego becomes frantic. It tries to seduce you with anger, provoke you with fear, tempt you with guilt, pull you into useless fantasies. But once you've tasted even a moment of the holy instant, once you've experienced the purity of presence, those temptations feel strangely thin, like shadows pretending to be mountains. You begin to see that fear is not deep, it is repetitive. Guilt is not intelligent, it is mechanical. Worry is not intuition, it is imagination misused. Shame is not truth, it is conditioning. Attack is not strength, it is weakness in disguise. As this understanding deepens, the mind naturally clears, not because the thoughts stop appearing, but because they stop convincing you. Clarity is not the absence of thought. Clarity is the absence of obedience to thought. And then something beautiful begins to happen. You start choosing peace without trying to. You choose it the way you breathe, the way you blink, the way you turn toward warmth on a cold day, instinctively, effortlessly, naturally. This is the moment the Course calls the transfer of training. It is when understanding becomes recognition, recognition becomes trust, trust becomes habit, habit becomes identity. You no longer wake up each morning wondering how to manage your mind. You don't strategize your inner state. You don't schedule serenity. You don't fight with what arises. You simply notice. You simply return. You simply stay here. And here becomes enough. In this simplicity, you start feeling a presence within you, something soft, guiding, unintrusive, deeply sane. It feels like clarity wearing the shape of intuition. It feels like peace disguised as common sense. It feels like intelligence without effort. This is the Holy Spirit's voice, not a voice in the traditional sense, a direction, a tone, a gentle gravitational pull toward what is harmless, honest, and whole. When you listen, life feels smoother. When you listen, decisions align themselves. When you listen, conflict dissolves before it hardens. When you listen, the mind becomes a quiet channel for something wiser than personal thought. You realize the mind was never yours to manage alone. You were always meant to share it with a higher intelligence. And the more you trust this intelligence, the more the ego fades like a dissolving dream. You stop arguing with the unreal. You stop negotiating with fear. You stop defending illusions. Something inside you relaxes in a way that feels both ancient and brand new. You feel guided, supported, aligned, and the mind, once crowded with noise, begins to feel spacious, like the sky after a storm breaks. The clouds haven't vanished forever, but the sky no longer thinks the clouds define it. This is the secret. The mind becomes clear not when it stops having thoughts, but when it remembers it is larger than every thought. You become the sky again. Thoughts become weather again. And peace becomes the natural climate of your being. This is what it means to clear the mind. To recognize that nothing in the mind has ever been powerful enough to obscure what you are. And once you see that clearly, even for a breath, a shift occurs that cannot be reversed. You understand directly that the truth is not hidden. The truth is not complicated. The truth is not fragile. The truth is not in the future. The truth is what remains when you stop believing the unreal. In that realization, the mind clears itself, not through striving, not through effort, but through remembering the simplest fact in existence. Only what is true can stay. Everything else passes. And you, the awareness behind the mind, are what stays.